Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. What could be worse than an annoying neighbor? A pregnant annoying neighbor. That's what the first story's about. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. Neighbor would come to my house without permission and take whatever she wanted. This story happened many years ago. While we were in the military, we moved frequently, and at one base in particular, we lived in condo-style houses, lines of homes that have one or two walls that are connected to each other. I mention the type of house because it shows how close we were to our neighbors. We did have our own driveways, but they were for single cars and were right next to our neighbors. This base was in a warm location where we should have had air conditioning, but we did not. We were enlisted and lived in older houses, and only newer enlisted and officer housing had AC. The reason I mention this is because I would leave my front door open and have just the screen door closed so we could get crosswind to cool the house. This should not have been a big deal, right? Wrong. Our neighbor that was connected to our left liked to come over and borrow things. Our neighbor, or choosing beggar, will be referred to as CB moving forward, would come over and, at the beginning, she would knock and would ask for things such as a cup of sugar or milk. Then as time progressed, CB would knock and just walk in, and at this point, she still asked for stuff. To be honest, this didn't really bother me too bad because it wasn't too frequent, and then all of a sudden it changed, and CB stopped knocking altogether and began just walking in. I did say something, keeping it light in hopes that it would work. I knew we were going to be neighbors for a while, and it could be bad to have a bad relationship between neighbors. Back then, I had a lot of anxiety about having negative interactions with people. Then, CB became pregnant, and her entitlement all of a sudden knew no bounds. CB would not only walk into my house, she would go into my fridge or freezer and grab whatever she wanted. This one time I was making dinner, and she walked over, smelled it, grabbed a plate, and served herself. I said something to the effect of, "I'm making that for my husband," and CB responded that she's only taking a little and there'll be plenty for him. That was it. I was mad. After that, I tried locking my screen door, but the cheap lock wouldn't hold. CB was able to pull the door open and eventually snap the lock off. I finally said screw it and started shutting my actual door, which sucked because it was hot and no AC, but it was better than dealing with her every day. I thought that would work, but she started going through our back door and coming through our screen door. Oh, did I mention her husband was like 3 ranks higher than mine was? And she was seriously taking from us when they could afford way more. Anyway, this went on while CB was pregnant. Finally, after CB had her baby, CB started asking for even more. She wanted my husband to come kill bugs when her husband wasn't home. She asked me to do things she could easily do for herself, like go to the grocery store. The final straw was she woke me up at 2 a.m. saying, so cold and mumbling, I seriously thought something was wrong with her baby. I got up, woke my husband up, let him know, and ran over to her house, and I do mean ran. I ran into her house, door was unlocked, and CB was lying on the couch. She wasn't feeling good. She wanted me to get her a blanket from her upstairs closet. I finally lost my crap and told her I thought something was wrong with her baby. I was over it. I told her, CB, you are not to walk into our house without permission, and you are not to ask my husband for anything anymore. The only way it's ever okay to call me in the middle of the night ever again is because you need 911. CB just looked at me and said something about, since I'm here, can I get the blanket? And that I'm being a horrible neighbor. I walked out of her house, went home, and went to bed. Moving forward, CB scowled at me every time she saw me and pointed at me and talked about me to her husband and other neighbors who told me later. CB's husband got orders and they finally moved. I was so happy because she made it uncomfortable being at my own home till she did. And our second story. Boss fires me with questionable ethics. I turn her career upside down. Many years ago, I accepted a job in an industry I was trying to break into for many years before. This was my first professional job, and I was still pretty naive on the business dynamics, meaning I didn't play the way they wanted me to. For many of the people I worked with, this was fine. My boss, Nina, was something else. I learned pretty quickly to just go with the flow and remain under her radar. This worked for a time before I couldn't handle it anymore. I'll get to that shortly. Nina prided herself on getting things handled when nobody else can. This was likely because of how relentless she was. She believed she was friends with everybody. But I think most people were doing exactly like I was, trying to keep her happy so she didn't get worse. One such event was the placement of a new temporary, only in the fact that the company did not want to build a new structure building. There were many questions raised about the legality of the placement, but Nina worked her magic and the building was placed right where she wanted it. This was ideal for her since she could pick the office with the best view. Keep in mind that this trailer was maybe 2 steps above a festival porta potty. The way she spoke about it, you'd think she was describing the Sistine Chapel. As time went on, I learned why this placement was so important to her. Her husband's company was contracted to perform the work. Ethics be damned. This did not sit well with me, and I started noticing a trend in her contractor preferences. It always leaned towards those that used her husband's company. I tried to address this with her personally, which would only result in her using her experience to teach me that there are many aspects I do not understand for selecting contractors. I tried to bring this to the attention of people that could do something about it, but they all seemed to fear her as well. This facility has a lot of safety rules, and for good reason, with the number of hazards around. However, people had a habit of assuming a rule for a specific location of the facility applied to the entire facility. One being facial hair. Specific areas required respirators, so facial hair was not allowed. I did not work in any of those areas, nor anywhere remotely close to them. I still shaved regularly, but I wanted a bit of growth for my wedding. Months prior, I asked Nina if it was okay to grow it out for a month prior, and she agreed. We discussed it every 1 to 2 weeks until that month prior. The first Monday I showed up with a week's worth of growth, she lost her mind and began screaming at me. I stood up for myself without getting angry, and she continued to scream at me. Eventually, I relented and tried to defuse the situation. While I was able to get the safety department to approve my beard, I still received a message that I was youthfully defiant from my boss. From that point forward, all conversations were strictly professional from me, little/no emotion, to the point, nothing personal. For the following months, Nina became much more critical of my work. Directions she sent me in email and either matched or exceeded her requirements were immediately rejected. I had to recreate them with a new set of requirements. Literally, math became a point of contention. Nothing complex either. Basic arithmetic was scrutinized to the point that I had to explain, and this is not a joke, 8 + 1 = 9. My days were obviously numbered. Earlier this year, I was rushed to the hospital for a possible heart attack. I'm in my early 30s, by the way. Ultimately, it was determined to be because of major work stress and my diet, since I was forbidden from lunch in the end. After a few days in the hospital, my wife is given notification that I'm being fired. To this day, I have not been given a reason for being fired. The problem for my now former boss is that I have plenty of free time now. The first part started when coworkers began reaching out to see how my health was, and I'd subtly mention being fired. If they asked, I'd give as much detail without seeming malicious. This information started spreading quickly, and people began to put their walls around Nina. Evidently, I'd built a decent relationship with my peers. My next step was to call the corporate ethics hotline and leave an anonymous message about her blatant conflicts of interest with applicable project names and rough dates, making sure to mention her husband and his company by name. The first time that this call was effective came 2 weeks later when I learned that her Sistine Chapel had been condemned for being placed on a fault line and had to be vacated immediately. She was forced into a basement office with 2 other people. The good news for her is that she doesn't have to spend much time in that new office, though. She's spending more than 50% of her time in a remote location in Alaska that requires, at minimum, 2 days of travel one way. Additionally, she's been denied a replacement for me. This means she must perform all duties I did on top of her normal tasks. Not a great deal when you're salaried. In the end, she's alienated herself and is receiving no support. She travels mostly on her own time and spends more time in an airport working than in her office. Meanwhile, I've accepted a great job that has significantly reduced my blood pressure. Her last 5 years before retirement are going to be rough. I didn't do much, but isn't the best revenge to live your best life? And our last story. Have a thing for a former employee and question my competence? Enjoy getting fired? So I work for a pretty big environmental company that just got bought by a bigger company. We had a lot of turnover when this happened due to the uncertainty of what was going to happen. Out of 8 texts, only 2 stayed. So the pro-revenge part. We have 2 ladies up front, one asset manager and a financial manager. The asset manager is lovely, but the financial lady is a cancer that makes it hard to continue employment. One of the texts that left, we'll call FE, former employee, on his way out the door ended up green tagging a lot of equipment, basically saying it was ready for rental and or being put on job sites when none of them actually were. Toxic financial lady has a thing for FE and always has compared us to him, saying we weren't even close to being in his league. Last week, a pipeline job that Whale Supply said equipment to popped up and was rather short notice. We had to supply 3 pieces of rather large equipment. I pull them from the yard and get ready to make the required repairs. And financial lady lights me up about how I don't know what I'm doing and to leave it alone and just load it on the truck. I smile at her and ask her to sign off on the load out list, which means she ultimately took responsibility. She does in a huff and storms away. 2 days later, I come in and she's in tears cleaning out her office. She got fired for costing us over $200,000 for a 3-day job due to her beliefs the FE was a god. Called him and let him know. He just started cackling. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.